I just want to thank everyone for coming to this talk. And we have with us, of course, the Honorable Justice Sabrina S. McKenna. And we also have with us the Honorable Justice Michael Wilson, and both from the Supreme Court of Hawaii here with us today. Justice McKenna is going to be talking about gender, sexuality, and how that relates to the law. If you notice, the title did say one woman's story with the woman as an X, and I'm sure she'll be able to explain better what that's about. But just to give a short introduction of who Justice McKenna is, she was sworn in as the Associate Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court in 2011. She's also a graduate of the University of Hawaii at Manoa and the William S. Hutchinson School of Law. She served as editor-in-chief of the Law Review. She's also been a civil litigator, a corporate counsel, and a law professor. And now, of course, she's a justice of the Supreme Court. And she's going to be talking generally about her story and about gender, sexuality, and all things related. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kavya, and namaste. And as we say in Hawaii, aloha. Aloha. And thank you so much for the honor of being able to address you. I come to you from Hawaii, which is the 50th state in the United States. We became a state in 1959. And like India, Hawaii was colonized by Western forces. In Hawaii's case, it was by Western businessmen with the assistance of United States forces, which toppled Hawaii's Queen Liliuokalani in 1893. And like Hinduism, the native traditional Hawaiian religion is also, it's not monotheistic, and there's a belief in the sacredness and spirituality of natural phenomena and living beings. And like India, Hawaii also had a strong British influence. And when Hawaii law was codified, one of the first statutes provided, and it still states, that the common law of England was adopted as the law of Hawaii. But unlike India, Hawaii never regained its independence. And after the 1893 takeover with US forces, and then annexation by the United States, Hawaii did become a state in 1959. So Hawaii's legal system is now a part of the United States legal system. So before I go any further, I want to make sure you understand the basic structure of the United States legal system, because it does play an important part in my discussion. As you probably know, the United States has a federal system with the three branches of government: judicial, executive, and legislative. The national government is based in Washington, D.C. And I'm sure you probably know that the federal executive branch is headed by our president. The legislative branch consists of the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives, which is known as Congress. And the federal judiciary has district courts in each state, and in some states, many district courts. And there are various federal courts of appeal. And the country's judiciary is headed by the Supreme Court of the United States. And United States federal judges are at least nominally appointed by the president, subject to United States Senate confirmation. You may have heard of the United States Constitution and the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, which is called the Bill of Rights, which lays out certain civil rights for citizens. And you may be aware that before the United States was formed, there were 13 colonies. And after the Bill of Rights and after the country was formed, those 13 colonies became the first 13 states. What you may not have studied and may not know is that each of those 13 colonies had their own constitutions. And when they became states, they also became their state constitutions. And you may not know that the Bill of Rights is actually derived from provisions in those state constitutions. And what's really important is that in the United States, all 50 states, including Hawaii, have its own constitution. And under American law, the Supreme Courts of each of those 50 states is free to interpret their own state constitutions to give greater rights than is provided under the Bill of Rights. That's really important because I understand that in, the Indian Constitution, you do allow certain states to exercise, have their own, well, I understand that Jammu Kashmir is maybe the only state that has its own constitution, but the Constitution says that, different states can have different laws, and I understand some states have Sharia law, and those laws can actually limit the rights that are provided under the federal, the India Constitution. In the United States, it's opposite. The state constitution can give greater rights than under the federal constitution, but the rights given under the federal constitution are the floor, but not the ceiling. So that's really important. And that's also true of statutory rights, civil rights that might be provided by statute rather than by constitutional interpretation. And so I wanted to be sure that you're aware of that because it's really important. And also, what's also important is that each state has its own judicial selection and retention system. Some 38 states have elected judges. Hawaii does not. We have what we call a merit selection and retention system, but I just want you to be aware of that. So I've provided you with a backdrop, and now I want to tell you my story. And although I'm from Hawaii and I'm much older than all of you except Justice Wilson, I hope you'll hear some commonalities and some information that might be of use for you as you go forward in your studies and ventures in India. I was born in October of 1957, so you know how old I am. You're doing the calculations in your head. I was the only child of a father from the Midwestern United States and a Japanese mother. I was raised in Japan, and in first grade we lived in the Philippines. I was raised in a bilingual, bicultural, and multi-religious background. My father was raised a Christian, and like almost all Japanese, my mother was raised as Shinto, which is the traditional, more like animistic, religion, and Buddhism. So I therefore grew up honoring all three religions as I was growing up. My father was an educational administrator and a professor of psychology for the University of Maryland for the U.S. military forces in the Far East that wanted to pursue a college education. And my mother was a homemaker. I attended United States military schools overseas, but when I was 9 years old, my father suddenly died of a heart attack. And my mother and I then moved from the biggest house in the neighborhood to the smallest house in the neighborhood. My mom sold our car, and bicycles became our primary form of transportation. My mother started working as the night shift front desk clerk at the local U.S. military hotel to support us, and so that I could continue to attend U.S. military schools. You've heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. That's definitely true for me. While my mother worked night shift a lot, I was often at my friends' parents' homes who fed me and took care of me. So from an early age, however, I saw how people are treated differently based on socioeconomic status, race, gender, and sexuality. When my mom started working at the U.S. hotel, I saw how people that would have been really like kowtowing to my father treat my mother with disdain. So for example, I'll never forget one day when I was actually sitting in the side room at my mom's hotel waiting for her to finish, and a American sergeant called downstairs and said, "My child urinated in the bed. I need someone to come up and clean the sheets." And my mom said, "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm the only one working here tonight, but if you can come down, I can give you a new set of sheets so that you can change the sheets." And he came down and he threw the sheets in my mother's face. And she took it because she needed that job and she didn't complain. But that's the kind of thing that made me think, someday, if I ever get into a position of authority, I will treat all people with respect, no matter what their stature in life. So my father's dream was to take my mother and I to Hawaii to retire teaching at the University of Hawaii and have me attend the University of Hawaii. So Because of this, and because my father was buried at the U.S. National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, and I knew that my mother eventually, when she died, would join him there, which was in 1997, that did happen. So therefore, I decided to attend the University of Hawaii. So I left Japan to enter UH in the summer of 1974. And I arrived in Hawaii with my mom's hard-earned savings and some scholarship funds I had received. And I actually worked in high school and college as a part-time model, believe it or not. And so I saved some of that money. And I rented, when I got to Hawaii, I rented a 2-bedroom apartment near the university. And I found a roommate from California and 2 roommates from Malaysia who were graduate students in library science, and from whom I learned a lot about Islam and Muslim traditions. And I paid my first semester of non-resident tuition, and then I went to look for a job right away. And I immediately got a job because, you see, Japanese is my first language, so I speak Japanese. There's a lot of Japanese tourists in Hawaii, so I went to Waikiki, which is the tourist area. Duty-free shop immediately offered me a job because I speak Japanese. And I called my mom. I said, "Mom, I got a job." And she said, "No, I don't want you to work. I want you to fully enjoy college experience. I don't want you to work while you're in college." So I said, "Okay, thank you." But it ended up being a really good thing because then I found out about this women's basketball team that was starting up, and I tried out, and I made the team. And after I made the team, the coach said, "I'm offering you a scholarship." And so they paid, I got my non-resident tuition back, and I went to college for free. So, you know, so why was I given a scholarship? I had no expectation of that. And I found out it was because of a law named Title IX. And this law had been passed by the United States Congress in 1972, which is basically a federal civil rights statute, right? And this law prohibited sex-based discrimination by any educational institution receiving federal funds. One of the principles, and that relates to elementary, primary, secondary, and college, university. So one of the principal sponsors of that bill, who championed its passage through Congress, was a United States Congresswoman named Patsy Takemoto Meek. So I want to tell you a little bit more about her and Title IX. Patsy Takemoto was born on Maui, the Hawaiian island of Maui, in 1927, and she graduated as valedictorian of Maui High School in 1944. She was the first girl to be elected president of her high school class. She got it by getting the support of the football team. She attended, that's American football, not your football, which we call soccer. Anyway, she attended the University of Nebraska, but she was placed in the international dormitory. And then she discovered that the international dormitory was for all non-Caucasians. And so she was very upset with this racial discrimination, and she started a campus movement to fight against these segregated dormitories for university students. And she was successful in changing the policy at the University of Nebraska. And approaching college graduation, she applied to medical school. She wanted to be a doctor. But despite her excellent credentials, she wasn't admitted, not just because of racial discrimination, but also because she was a woman. You see, at that time, in the late 40s, early 50s, only 2 to 3% of women in United States medical schools were women. They discriminated against women. So she decided to go to law school instead, and she was accepted to the University of Chicago in its foreign student quota. They didn't realize that Hawaii was a U.S. territory, I guess. They treated her as a foreign student. So she was only one of 2 women in her law school class. She married a graduate student at the University of Chicago named John Mink, and later they had a baby. They moved to Hawaii after her law school graduation. Hawaii law at that time required you to be a resident of the state of Hawaii for at least 1 year, and if you were away as a student, you could continue your residency in Hawaii. But under Hawaii law at the time, your residency, if you were married, your residency was determined by your husband's residency. And therefore, since her husband was not a Hawaii resident, the Hawaii Bar, the Hawaii Supreme Court at that time initially said, you can't take the bar exam for a year. She fought against that. She actually won because it actually violated the United States Constitution's right to travel. And she passed the bar, and in 1953, she became the first Japanese-American woman lawyer in Hawaii. But no law firm would hire this Japanese-American woman. So she opened her law office, her own office. She had a few clients. She even taught a few business courses at the University of Hawaii. In 1956, she ran for the State House of Representatives. She was elected and became the first Japanese-American woman legislator in Hawaii. Then in 1964, she ran for and was elected a United States representative to Congress, and she became the first non-Caucasian woman to serve in Congress. She then championed the passage of Title IX in 1972 so that others wouldn't have to go through the same gender discrimination that she had endured. And Title IX is really a simple law. It's 37 words. It basically says that any educational institution cannot discriminate with respect to gender for any program or activity. But the impact of Title IX really, this law has been immensely important. With respect to athletics, in 1972, when that law passed, there were no women's athletics programs at the University of Hawaii, none whatsoever. Due to Title IX, the university was required to create a women's athletics program. So the University of Hawaii started with a volleyball team, and then they added a basketball team, which I tried out for in 1974, and that's why I was given a scholarship. But the impact of Title IX is actually much greater than athletics. It prohibits discrimination in academic programs. When Title IX passed in 1972, only 7% of United States law school graduates were women. Only 9% of United States medical school graduates were women. 1972, that's really, I know it's eons for you guys, but it's really not that long ago. I was 15 years old at the time. Now, more than 50% of all United States law and medical students and graduates are women. And now, more than 50% of United States college and graduate students and degree recipients are women. Now, I'm not saying that it's perfect. We're not doing as well on the STEM fields, but in general, women are now the majority at United States universities. And the impact of Title IX is much more important than just American women. It has opened the door for international women. For example, President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan received a master's in law degree from Cornell University. The 2011 Nobel Peace Prize laureate Lima Gbowie of Liberia received a Master of Arts in Conflict Transformation from the Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. The 2018 Nobel Physics Prize laureate, Dr. Donna Theo Strickland of Canada, received her PhD from the University of Rochester. And Indra Nooyi, chairman of PepsiCo, received a master's degree in public and private management from Yale School of Management in 1980. I could go on, and I would include many faculty members here at Jindal. And I believe that some of you have already or will pursue studies in the United States. So, as you can see, Title IX's impact has been immense. I would actually go on to say that at this point, the person from Hawaii that is most well known for having significant impact in the world has been President Barack Obama. He's from Hawaii. But perhaps the person from Hawaii who has had the most impact is actually Congresswoman Patsy Takemoto Mink. And in recognition of this, in 2002, when she untimely died of pneumonia, the United States Congress renamed Title IX as the Patsy T. Mink Equal Opportunity and Education Act. So it's really amazing to me that this transformative law was named and championed after an Asian American woman from Hawaii. That's the power of the law. That's the power that even one person can have on this world. Thanks to Title IX, I was able to be admitted to the University of Hawaii William S. Richardson School of Law, no problem, 1979, no gender discrimination. There was a third of my class was women, and now it's over 50%. And after law school, I was a civil litigator for a large law firm in Honolulu. And I also represented Japanese business clients because of my language ability. And, you know, let me say, I was really fortunate to be mentored and sponsored by enlightened men, enlightened male attorneys who were more interested in my abilities as a lawyer than in my gender. But let me also say that I realized it helped that I had been a college athlete, because I actually played on the sports teams, the Lawyers League basketball and volleyball and softball teams with the male attorneys in the firm. So I became one of the guys hanging out, you know, with the lawyers. And, you know, actually there's this article that I really encourage all of you to Google and read. It's from the American periodical called The Atlantic, and it's called The Confidence Gap. And this article says that girls that play team sports are more likely to graduate from college, find a job, and to be employed in male-dominated industries. And there's also a link between playing sports and earning a bigger salary as an adult. Interesting, huh? So after 5 years at this law firm, I joined a Japanese client on his worldwide travels. There was an economy, it was called the bubble economy. The world was flush with all this insurance money in the late 80s. And I traveled around the world with the Japanese owner of this company looking for investment opportunities. After 3 years on this job, I burned out because I realized I wouldn't be able to have any children if I continued in that job. And I am now blessed to have 3 children who are aged 23, 20, and 16. And my oldest, Tyler, was here interning, and Kavya, and interned with Professor Devika Jain also. And my second one hopes to end up here someday soon. My third one is still 16. He's still a little bit young to be thinking about it. But anyway, I resigned from that company, and I decided at that time it was time for me to give back to the community, Hawaii, that had given me so much. A free education, very, very cheap tuition, law school. When I went to law school, tuition was only $650 a year. That is really cheap. So I decided I wanted to give back to the community, and I decided I wanted to try to be a judge. And one of the reasons I decided to apply to be a judge at that time is that in 1991, Hawaii had actually passed a law, the Hawaii legislature had passed a law prohibiting employment discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. Hawaii was just the 3rd state to do so. And just as Title IX had helped me access law school, I knew that this law would prohibit anyone from discriminating against me as a member of the LGBTQ community. And I thought of all employers, the judiciary would probably be the one most likely to follow the law. And so in order to become a judge in the state of Hawaii, I told you all states have different methods. You have to apply to this 9-member Judicial Selection Commission, 4 lawyers, 5 lay people, and you have to become one of 6 finalists, and then you have to be selected by the person that does the appointing. And for the lower courts, our appointing authority is actually the Chief Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court, and for our higher courts, our Court of General Jurisdiction, Intermediate Court, and Supreme Court, it's the governor of the state of Hawaii. So I applied to be a judge in 1991 because I wanted to go into public service. The first time I applied, I did not make the list of finalists. But I was very, very lucky. I also applied to be an assistant professor at the law school. And I got that job, and these people follow the law too. So it was good. And, you know, law schools tend to be liberal. And so it wasn't a problem. My sexuality was not a problem at the law school. Then in 1993, the Hawaii Supreme Court issued a landmark judgment called Bayer versus Lewin. And remember that I mentioned state constitutions, and that state Supreme Courts can interpret state constitutions to give more rights than under the United States Constitution. Well, just like India's constitution, the Hawaii State Constitution has a provision explicitly prohibiting gender discrimination. And in 1993, based on that provision, the Hawaii Supreme Court in the Bayer versus Lewin judgment became the first court in the world to rule that denial of same-sex marriage could be unconstitutional. So Hawaii Supreme Court was the first court in the world to so hold. And this, but it was Hawaii that actually started, just like Patsy Mink from Hawaii got Title IX, Hawaii started the conversation on same-sex marriage. Now, after that, there was a major backlash. You know, the federal Congress passed the Defense of Marriage Act. A lot of states amended their own constitutions to prohibit same-sex marriage. And in fact, unfortunately, Hawaii itself passed an amendment to its constitution saying that the Hawaii legislature could restrict marriage to opposite-sex couples. So the Hawaii legislature did pass a law. So same-sex marriage actually remained illegal in Hawaii until 2013. But because of the Bayer versus Lewin case, the national and international conversation started. As you now know, 26 countries have legalized same-sex marriage. I realize India is not there yet, as the rest of Asia is not, and almost all of Africa. I think South Africa has legalized it. But, you know, and I realize that in India, it was only September 6th of 2018 that Section 377 was ruled unconstitutional. And, you know, regarding federalism, let me just mention that Hawaii had a provision just like Section 377. And you may have heard, and internationally people study a lot about the United States Supreme Court, so you might have heard that in 2003, the United States Supreme Court in a judgment called Lawrence versus Texas ruled that a Texas law prohibiting homosexual sodomy was unconstitutional. And that made those laws in the other states that still had such a law unconstitutional. But I want you to know that Hawaii had abolished that law in 1972. So there was no such law on Hawaii's books from 1972. So in any event, when Hawaii became the first state in the world, first court in the world to rule that denial of same-sex marriage could be unconstitutional, it just strengthened my resolve to want to be a member of the Hawaii State Judiciary. I applied again in 1993. This time I made the list. And in November 30th, 1993, I was sworn in as a state lower court district court judge. And in 1995, I became a finalist to be a judge at a higher level of trial court, which we call our circuit courts. And I was selected then. And at the circuit court, I presided over criminal and civil cases. And then I became the chief judge of our family court on Oahu. In the meantime, from 2000 to 2010, I applied to the Judicial Selection Commission many times, and I also applied to be a federal court judge. I was a finalist many, many times, but I was never selected, especially by the Republican governor that preceded the governor that appointed Justice Wilson and I. But read this article, especially the women. The confidence gap article in the Atlantic. That article also says that playing team sports helps women learn to cope with victory and defeat. It's really good in the workplace. It helps you to own your triumphs, but survive setbacks also. So I actually think that my sports background helped me all the times I was rejected as a Supreme Court or an appellate judge or a federal court judge. So, but when I applied again for the Hawaii Supreme Court in late 2010, I was on the list of finalists, and I was selected by the new governor, Governor Neil Abercrombie. So I was really honored to become a justice of the Hawaii State Supreme Court. In 2011, I was sworn in. I chose to be sworn in on March 3rd, which is Girls' Day in Japan. I thought that was very appropriate. And I also happened to be the third woman to serve on the Hawaii Supreme Court. And let me just say as an aside, India, you need more women judges. You need more women on your Supreme Court. I hope that Jindal Law School would be active in really pushing for that. You need to have a representative judiciary. It not only gives you legitimacy, but I can tell you that diversity helps create better judgments. I think so, don't you, Mike? Yeah, yes, because we have different points of view. We bring different ideas to the table. And when you have the same type of people, although you have a wonderful Supreme Court that has ruled, in terms of third gender and finally in 377, but I think you could have, I think it's more important that you have more women on the Supreme Court and on the lower courts also. So remember that I mentioned that in 1972, only 7% of United States law school graduates were women, and now over 50% graduates are women, law school graduates. In 1972, when Title IX passed, there was only one woman judge in Hawaii. Now, 41% of Hawaii state judges are women. In our lower courts, 50% of our judges are women. We have 5 members of the Supreme Court. 2 of the 5 of us are women. We have 6 members of our Court of Appeals. 3 of 6 are women. That's the power of the law. Now I'm going to turn to another issue that is near and dear to my heart. I think I mentioned to you that in 2011, when I was nominated to the Supreme Court, I was the chief judge of the family court. In that position, I learned some sobering facts. I learned that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer youth were 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. But I also learned that LGBTQ youth that come from families that reject them are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than LGBTQ youth that come from families that accept them. I also learned that in the United States, while 80% of Caucasian LGBTQ youth come out to their parents, only 71% of Latinos, 61% of African Americans, and only 51% of Asian Americans had come out to their parents. And I knew why. Children know what their parents' attitudes are, and therefore whether their parents are likely to accept or reject them. So, as an Asian American, I think I know why there are still no Asian countries that recognize same-sex marriage. But because of this, when I was appointed to the Hawaii Supreme Court, I thought it was very important for me to be open and honest about my sexual orientation and to be open about how much of a struggle I had had growing up with internalized and external homophobia. So I decided to be open about my sexuality when I was interviewed by the media about my nomination. And I became the first Asian American who was an open member of the LGBTQ community to serve as a justice of a court of last resort, a Supreme Court in the United States. Thank you. And now there are 2 more, Justice Lynn Nakamoto of the Oregon Supreme Court and Justice Mary Yu of the Washington Supreme Court. And there are now at least 11 openly LGBTQ justices on state Supreme Courts. And in the United States, there are many open judges of the lower state and federal courts. And I hope that in my lifetime, I will see an open member of the LGBTQ community to serve on the United States Supreme Court. So, Hawaii state law. I talked about state law, state constitutionalism, state laws providing greater protection. Hawaii state law explicitly prohibits discrimination based not only on gender, but also based on sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, in employment, housing, public accommodations, and education. And I feel really fortunate to live in Hawaii, where I can live openly and I am protected. And I lament that these same protections are not provided by all states in the United States and not by the federal government and other countries, including countries in Asia. So, but I do want to make it clear that even though we have come a long way in Hawaii, it's not perfect. There are still people that don't come out, are uncomfortable. A lot of times it's the families that they're dealing with. And in terms of gender, We still have a wage gap, but it's like 80 cents to a dollar. It's better than some countries. And as you notice, my speech, I spelled women with an X. And this is my way of expressing support for the transgender and gender fluid communities. Because some feminists and some women will not accept transgender women. United States, there's very little recognition of a third gender. There have been some states, I think California now allows third gender recognition on birth certificates, but Hawaii is not there yet. The other states don't do it. A lot of states, including Hawaii, are now allowing third gender on driver's licenses, identification cards. So when you have to present your identification, you don't have to identify as a man or a woman if you choose not to. But the United States still has a long way to go regarding the rights of non-binary or transgender individuals. So I wanted to express my solidarity and my support of these communities. And I also think, I encourage you to invite and listen to the stories of members of the third gender or transgender, or however they might identify. For me, in the United States, hearing from friends that are male to female transgender or female to male transgender, it really helps me understand how much sex discrimination, gender discrimination still exists in Hawaii, because people are treated differently based on their gender presentation. And some people that can completely pass as the gender that they've transitioned to, they are treated totally differently based on compared to their past life. So at this point, I'm approaching the end of my discussion and story, and I thank you so much for being here and for listening. And I hope I've provided you with some information that might be useful in your life, or provide you with inspiration to lead your communities in no matter what way. I don't care if it's LGBTQ rights or whatever it is. All people need to support other communities to end discrimination in all forms. My life, I've had some ups and downs, but overall, I've had a wonderful journey so far, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. I'm just teasing, but I've been able also to meet a lot of people, and I just want to leave you with some thoughts. And especially because I'm in a university setting with so many young people, I want to talk to you about, some things that I hope will help you and lead to whatever success that you might want to pursue, however you might define it. And whether it has to do with gender or sexuality or country or family or whatever, and whether or not you have legal protections. Most of all, I think it's really important to be a good person, to be humble and respectful and kind. And I think it's really important to never forget how important your family is, and to be understanding to your family, no matter how discriminatory they may be. I think it's really important to be critical. It's critical to do your best, no matter what it is. The Japanese have a saying, it's called ichiji ga banji, and it means one action represents 10,000 actions. So it means whatever you do, whether it's how you wipe a table, clean up, how you wash your dishes, how you say hello to a person, how you study for exam, one thing represents 10,000 things. And the way you do your best in whatever it is you're doing will have results as you go forward in life. It impacts how people see you, how people treat you, and whether people will be willing to support you in your ventures throughout life. It's really important to be fair and honest in no matter what you do. Your reputation will precede you. You can destroy it overnight. Have you seen those scandals, university admission scandals in the United States? Terrible, right? It's also remember that we all have internal, implicit, unconscious biases. Think about it and work on ways of overcoming those biases. Please Google the Harvard Implicit Association test. Take some of those online tests. you're going to find out that you're biased even against some of your own attributes. For example, I took the test in front of all judges of the state of Hawaii. We had a session on implicit bias. I took the test on women in the workplace, and I have implicit biases against women in the workplace. I have implicit biases against the LGBTQ community. Internalized discrimination, society is so strong. We all have implicit biases. We need to work to overcome them. Especially for the women here, I encourage you to read that article in The Atlantic that I told you regarding the confidence gap. It's really important, especially for Asian women, to understand that confidence begets confidence. Studies show that when people are told that they did well on a practice exam, they actually do better the next time around. When they are told that they did poorly, they actually do poorer. So when you grow up and you're being told you're not good enough, it affects you. Be confident, even if you don't feel confident. Be confident. Dig into your core and be confident. You are a good person. You are worthy. You know, for example, when I received my undergraduate, and you have to visualize your success, right? Visualize your success. When I was told, when I saw people receiving, when I was receiving my undergraduate degree, and I saw people receiving the law degree, I said, okay, that's going to be me. I see myself. When I saw people getting sworn into the Hawaii Supreme Court, I said, that's going to be me someday. I mean, it may not happen, but it gives you that drive, right? And so, women, don't self-deprecate. Learn to accept compliments gracefully. I'm still learning this. It's hard. I grew up in Japan. Self-deprecation is, especially for women, is so common. I'm still learning this. Learn to accept compliments graciously. Don't preface your statements with, I'm sorry. You don't need to be sorry for speaking up. Express yourself. Your opinions do matter, and take pride in yourself. Also, it's really important to learn to forgive yourself. You make mistakes. I have made mistakes in my life, and I would just think and beat myself up, right? Forgive yourself. You're human. You make mistakes. You made a mistake means you tried to do something. You have to take risks. If I didn't take risks, I wouldn't be on the Hawaii Supreme Court. If I hadn't kept applying, I wouldn't be here. So, finally, I want to say that there's some truth to the saying, 80% of success is just showing up. I try to show up as much as possible. It means try different things, show up. And you always learn something when you show up. And when I show up, I undoubtedly learn something, and I also make unexpected connections that help lead to something else. And it has added opportunity and richness to my life. So I want to thank you for showing up today. And I hope that you will continue to show up at different events. And I hope that you make the connections and have the experiences that will open up your lives and lead you to whatever success that you choose. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address you. I wish you much success in your studies and in your careers. And just as I opened my speech, namaste and aloha. Mahalo. Thank you. And now I open it up to any questions that you may have. Any questions? No questions?
Well, just give, there's the 30-second rule,
Yeah.
which is, so 30 seconds to absorb the...
Absorb, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I've absorbed it.
Okay, all right. Yes, please.
Firstly, I want to say thank you for particularly the last 10 minutes of your talk. I think it's not often that we have speakers also, kind of come and talk to us so personally about their other experiences. And I think I'm mean, I'm a faculty member here and I still found it deeply inspiring. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering, so we talk about this idea of diversity as being good in and of itself. So it's not just that, say for example, I represent XYZ intersectionality of identities, and therefore I am good for that space because I can speak to those experiences. But it's rather that my experiences will enable me to be a good speaker across the board or a good representative across the board because I might have a different vision of what empathy looks like. So I was just wondering if you could just tell us a bit about maybe some of your deliberations while you've been a judge, where you think that your identity or experience is actually played out, and not necessarily in cases that involve sexuality or gender, but across the board maybe. I was just curious about that. If you think that does sort of.
I think that, being a member of a community that has been discriminated against transcends all levels, and so it helps you become more empathetic and understand the struggles of other people, no matter what their struggles may be, and it could be anything, I think, so I think it has helped me in my judgments. I think Justice Wilson, you see him as a privileged white male, but in Hawaii, white males aren't necessarily privileged. I think the people that have been to Hawaii understands that there is anti-Caucasian discrimination in Hawaii. Hawaii is a majority-minority state, and because white people are seen as colonizers, even if you're not descended from the colonizers, there's discrimination against you. And having attended schools in Hawaii, he had to battle his own battles of discrimination in Hawaii. So I think it makes you more empathetic, and it helps you understand the struggles of other people. I'm sorry, I know you said not gender and sexuality, but I can tell you that as a family court judge where I was presiding on custody battles or visitation, issues of visitation of child custody, where people that were married or were not married were separating and they were battling over who gets to have primary custody over a child, I would consciously try to think, okay, all right, these, I have to list the attributes and of each parent and what they bring to the table. And am I ruling based on the fact that this is a woman or this is a man? I have to be really conscious of that. And so there were times that when the father was the primary caretaker of the child, the mother was working all the time, the child was more attached to the father, I gave the father primary custody because that was the right thing to do. I think it makes you have to be conscious of these things. And I do think that no matter what it is, I think it helps you see that there are different ways of seeing the world, and no matter what it might be, even if it's not a discrimination thing, you become much more open in terms of different ways of navigating and seeing the world. I think that's how diversity helps, yes. Any other questions? Don't be shy. Yes?
I was just wondering, you took that test, the implicit bias test in front of everybody.
Yes.
And whether or not that impacted the way you responded to things. I mean, would you not see yourself in your own identity as a bit of, there's a bit of a performative element to taking that test publicly,
yes.
Everyone, and to what extent does an implicit bias test or tests in general help deal with biases? Can that be tackled at all? Is it possible really? Because you have similar tests along the lines of race happening in different settings.
Yes.
And how, if at all, can we deal with?
Right. Yes, right. So you're right. The first step, I think that session was really more of a first step to have people understand cognitive biases, whether it's implicit bias or, it's all these different biases, right? And I'm not, I'm not a cognitive science, but, there's stereotypes and there's there's anchoring biases, like in terms of, depending on how much people ask for, how much you might be entitled to, you might end up giving in terms of damages. There's so many different cognitive biases, and so that session really was geared toward helping us understand that, because so many of us think that, oh no, I'm not biased, and it was just to make people see that we can be biased against ourselves. So if I can be biased against myself, then, please, everyone, understand that you can be biased. The next step really is how do you deal with the biases that you do have, and what are the steps that you can take? And those are the discussions that we are having now. What happens? Because how do we address the biases that we do have? How do we overcome them? But you can't overcome them without recognizing that they exist. That's why I think it's so important. And I think I volunteered to become I volunteered for that just so that people wouldn't be, especially the lower court judges, wouldn't feel intimidated or feel self-conscious about taking the test. It's like, okay, if she can do it, then I can do it too. And if someone that I'm known as someone that is more like a civil rights person, and so if this person can admit to her own biases, then maybe we can start admitting to ours too. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
So there was this movie, it was titled On the Basis of Sex. It showed the bias against legal profession in the US, and I think the same exists in India. So, my question is that despite the laws that are existing, we have a lot of women in the law school. But once you go out there in the world, there is a feeling that we advocates are lawyers, but we have very few judges who are actually lawyers. So
Right.
if you could talk about that.
Right. And so you have this collegium system, right? I understand. And I think people need to advocate to either have the system, I hate to say this, changed, or if you can't change it, then keep talking. You have to keep writing articles and talking, and I'm assuming that the women advocates have their own organization. In Hawaii, it was finally when there was enough women lawyers to come together to form an organization called Hawaii Women Lawyers. That organization started advocating, and that had power because people don't, like to be told how discriminatory they are, and so they feel like, because the judges in general see themselves as enlightened, right? They want to perceive themselves as enlightened and non-discriminatory people. And when they're told that, wait a minute, look at what's going on, and then they feel like, oh, and look, this women's organization is speaking up and advocating, we have to do something about it, And then what happens is when people complain and, there's movement starting, then people that are in positions of power that are sympathetic can then speak up and say, yes, we need to do something. You are going to find that there are sympathetic people, I think, within the judiciary or within the collegium, but people need to, there has to be all these different fronts. There has to be women judges speaking up, there needs to be advocates, there need to be law schools, there need to be citizens. People need to speak up and criticize and be overtly critical and say that, this is not acceptable. We want our judiciary to represent us, the people. It gives you credibility. At least when the same judgment is handed down by, women, right? If it's all these men that hand out a judgment against women, then the women are going to feel like, oh, this was just sexist, And the thing is, I can tell you that having women on the court changes perspectives. It really does. Domestic violence was totally accepted I think that the move against domestic violence in the United States really started with women lawyers becoming more prominent and speaking up. So, the more advocates you get, please push for a more well-rounded judiciary. Yes, Akriti.
No, I wanted to bring this up because you brought up that article in the confidence game. So, I don't know, I feel like in India especially, like during my internships, I've seen this quite often. So, in a courtroom setup, like it's a very male-dominated area. And when a woman lawyer is a little bit more aggressive, it's often talked about in a very bad way. But at the same time, you have to be that otherwise you can't be heard. If you're too soft, then
Kहाँ
you
सूट है
know,
आपका?
the judge will ignore you or something like that, right? It's such a dilemma because you're stuck.
Right.
And
इसमें
you
दूसरी आवाज़ रिकॉर्ड
always
हो
have
गई।
to be this assertive person, but you're also not looked upon favorably because you're that assertive person. So I don't know if you witnessed that during your time, like.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, feminism in the United States in general, you know, like some of the first feminists were seen as strident, you know, like male-like women, right? And they were criticized for that, you know. It takes all, but yeah, it's difficult to navigate, but you do have, the women have to speak up, you know, you have to, and the main thing is, are you getting the judgments or not, right? I mean, are you able to prevail or not? And the better you do, the more respect you get. And women, I mean, from my generation, we had to work harder, and we had to be better than the guys. I mean, and I'm sure that's true in India right now. I think we're getting to the point in the United States that we have some mediocre women, right? I mean, yeah, we have some mediocre women that are coming up that just as mediocre as some of the men were, you know? So it's, in a sense, that's good. Any other questions?
I think we're actually running out of time.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address you.
And thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Aloha.